Hello and welcome to the Third Sector. I'm your host, Tamara Brinkman. In our society, there are three sectors: the public, the private, and the nonprofit. And it's that third sector that we're here to talk about today. Joining me on today's show, Carl Rhinehart from Wayne County Cares. Carl is the Chief Doing Officer for Wayne County Cares. Carl, welcome to the Third Sector.
Thank you, Tamara, for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled that you were able to give us some time and share with me and also our viewing audience all about Wayne County Cares. And before we dive into that and what it is and all about Wayne County Cares, tell us a little bit about the title, Chief Doing Officer. I love that.
Yeah, Chief Doing Officer, a title that I adopted. Actually, so in some similar work that aligned with Wayne County Cares through Purdue University, a team that we worked with there, they came up with that title, Chief Doing Officer, and so I liked it as well, and so I adopted it.
Yeah.
Basically, what that means is that I'm the person kind of in the front, just kind of helping to lead the charge. Working on keeping things organized, setting agendas, communicating with our core team, as well as with community partners, establishing those community partners, kind of so on and so forth. Just, really keeping us organized and keeping us moving.
Right. Well, it's a great title because I'm sure a lot of people sort of feel like that's really what their day-to-day life is like. And that title probably more aligns with your work than other titles do for jobs similar. So we're here to talk about Wayne County Cares. Tell the community, it's a new organization, so let's talk about Wayne County Cares. What is it? When did it get started in our community?
Sure. So Wayne County Cares is a coalition, and that's definitely something I want people to really understand. It's not a nonprofit organization per se, so it's not formally recognized and registered as a nonprofit organization. It is a group of individual community members that have come together to help Wayne County become a more trauma-informed and trauma-responsive community. And so how it got started was a few years back, some folks in education, juvenile probation got together, and the education folks came from Richmond, and then also out at Western Wayne, so here in Wayne County, but came together, and I think it was definitely a really crucial time in our community where we were experiencing quite a bit of trauma. I mean, if we think back, we know of violence in our community, especially gun violence that involves our youth. A tragic situation that happened in one of our Richmond schools. And so on and so forth. And these folks came together and recognizing the issue said, hey, what can we do to help? What can we do to have an impact? What can we do if, what more could we do if Wayne County was a trauma-informed community? Basically understanding what trauma is, how it impacts, and what are some ways that we can mitigate or kind of combat that. And Wayne County Cares formed out of that conversation.
So if we could just for a moment kind of dig in and maybe unpack a little bit when we talk about trauma. So you gave one example, right? We a few years ago had a school shooting incident in Wayne County. I'm sure all of our community is very aware of that from history. But if I'm not mistaken, when we're talking about trauma, it's not always things that are as severe as like a shooting. I think so to just kind of peel away and give us a little bit more about what that picture looks like when we're talking about trauma, or what all we're talking about when we say trauma informed.
Absolutely. And I think here in Wayne County, we have done a lot of great work. And so you've got a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals who've done a lot of great work to better understand what trauma is. I think traditionally and in past, we would think trauma would be those major incidents like a shooting, that we would classify as a traumatic situation, or gross abuse or neglect of a child or of an individual as being a traumatic experience. But now we realize trauma is so much more broad than that. I mean, it's really defined by the individual, and it is that frightening, stressful, highly stressful situation. It could be a one-time thing. It could be over a series of situations and events that could be that trauma. But natural disasters would fall, under that umbrella. If you lived through that COVID-19 and all of that came with that, would classify as a traumatic experience, especially again, as to how it impacted your life and how it has adjusted, the way in which you think and function. And so, again, a very broad term that it's important for us as a community to recognize how broad trauma is, so that way we can do a really good job at combating it.
So, as you mentioned at the start, this was born out of the education, kind of that K through 12 space. With some leaders and then some other folks that serve in other areas in our community, serve the youth, and trying to figure out better ways to sort of handle how the repercussions of that, whether they are recovering from it or maybe they were an instigator that caused that trauma. Tell us a little bit about the difference between how the work is being done with youth and then also how it's being looked at from more that adult side of what Wayne County Cares is working on.
Sure. And I think Wayne County Cares, again, when it originally started, focused on the youth, kind of was started from that youth perspective, because the individuals that originally came together served that population. And so, it made sense for them to start there. And that's where they were seeing a lot of impact. I think as we've, continued on, we understand more that our adults are just as impacted by traumatic situations as well. And think about some traumatic situations that maybe a young person, a child might be involved in. That child probably has parents or caregivers of some sort. Those caregivers are probably going to be impacted in some way, by that situation that the child went through as well. And so now what we see is we have adults going through their everyday lives in Wayne County, wrestling with these traumatic situations and the thoughts that and issues that come along with it, but still yet they're having to work. They're having to engage with other community members. They're having to show up, for their children, so on and so forth throughout the community. And I think we really believe that it's really having an impact. And I think we can see that, so when we think of employment numbers and the lack of people that are taking on jobs, some of that could be due to trauma that they've been exposed to. And so it really challenges us to think, bigger than just that someone is lazy or someone doesn't want to work or someone isn't showing up for their child because they don't care about them. It really causes us to think about, what is it that could have happened to this individual that has now led them to act, in this way that we're having issue with. And so I think the work is very similar, I think, in how we look at, and I think the work with adults is really being informed by the work that we're doing with youth. And we have, through Wayne County Cares, have been doing some really cool things with youth.
Tell us a little bit about the mission or the vision of Wayne County Cares.
Yeah, again, I mean, short is that, again, Wayne County Cares hopes to help Wayne County become a more trauma-informed and trauma-responsive community. So number one, it's knowing about trauma and its impacts, but then two, it's how do we best respond to it? How do we best treat and respond to our community members who may have been impacted? in our mission as well too. There's 4 areas that we focus on, and that's, educating the community about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences and trauma. It's implementing evidence-based interventions to prevent and address the impacts of trauma. The third is continually engaging more partners to increase our impact. And then lastly, it's working collaboratively across sectors. And so through our events that we've had through Wayne County Cares and our conversations, we've been, continuously trying to hit on all 4 of those pillars or action items, so to speak, in our work.
Okay. What impact do you see Wayne County Cares having had already in the community?
One of the biggest things is just being able to bring people together. I think we recognize that there are other folks in Wayne County doing some of this work, having these conversations about trauma, the impacts, resiliency, Reed Health, Centerstone, Meridian, definitely in our social service, mental health sectors, those conversations are being had. And so Wayne County Cares has worked to pull those partners together, those community partners, and bring them together in an annual event that Wayne County Cares has put on and held throughout in the community. And so that's brought these folks together and continue to have conversations of where is trauma having an impact, and what can we do to help, as well as sharing information, best practices, so on and so forth. I think where we, want to go as well too is also to invite in folks from our business community, the private sector, and have them as a part of the conversation and a part of these events as well too. Again, as we know that trauma is impacting adults and their employees that they serve.
What are any examples of tools that might be helpful to businesses in if they're finding they've got an employee or employees that seems to sort of be an issue, way they might be able to help their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of what is already out there, I'm sure employers probably have like EAP, employee assistance programs. And so they already have at their disposal some things that they can initiate and direct their employees to when they're having challenging situations. I think some of what one might gain from coming to our annual events and listening to the speakers and the presentations is that sometimes, well, definitely with trauma and with individuals, it is not a one size fits all. And so some people may feel up to, going through the EAP process and utilizing those interventions, whereas others may not. And so really it's about, kind of thinking outside the box and being willing to have, other options available. And so being aware that we do have, community mental health centers here in town. Reed is doing some behavioral health work, Neighborhood Health Centers, another agency doing some behavioral health work, that agencies are able to refer to. And some of what Wayne County Cares is trying to do is, we want to help spread that awareness. And so, through our Facebook page and our social media presence there, we want to help communicate and let the community know who else, who's out here doing the work and who can actually serve, when the time is needed. And those conversations and information is also being shared during our events as well.
When we look at when we talk about trauma and kids, and you kind of mentioned this, sort of looking at the spectrum, and when you mentioned, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, maybe just elaborating a little bit more on what that is, it's a standard questionnaire kind of, if you want to talk a little bit about how you even know what an ACE is, or if you have ACEs, or if your child does, or because I think when we talk about trauma, people are probably thinking of things that are much more severe But when you mention it could be like a daily issue, that could be that they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. That is trauma, right? Every day that you don't
Absolutely.
know where your food's coming from, in as much as if you went to a school that had a school shooting, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And adverse childhood experiences, and I believe Read Health is doing some work in this space, and maybe even had a awareness campaign around that. Maybe I think on their website there's some additional information.
Yeah.
But adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, it's a simple questionnaire, and I think it's about 10
10
questions.
questions,
Forgive
yeah.
me, I'm not an expert.
No, right.
But
I think
in
you're
that,
right. It's like 10 questions. I have taken it. So, I mean, full
yes.
disclosure to the audience, I've participated in this process. I have taken that questionnaire. So,
Yes, and I have as well. And so it's questions, asking things like, someone in your household that maybe be incarcerated, and it's things that have happened to you before the age of 18. And so, things like abuse are listed there, sexual assault are listed there, but divorce,
right?
being in a home where parents are divorced, that's listed. And the questionnaire works just that anytime you can answer yes to a question, you just get a tally mark or 1 point. And at the end of the questionnaire, you add up your total to see if you have 0, 1, 2, or 10 ACEs. Now, the actual ACE study, what they found were that they were able to draw a correlation or a connection between the number of ACEs people in the community had and negative health outcomes. So increase in suicide, or increase in substance misuse, or premature death, so on and so forth. And so I think ACEs are a good tool. I mean, there's probably others out there, but definitely that's a good one to be able to help, first of all, identify the types of traumas that have impacted us,
Right.
but then also to be able to help us look at community-wide, how is this impacting our overall health?
So you mentioned at one point, as we're trying to help educate people about trauma and ACEs, and from the adult side of the house, obviously there's employability. Well, help draw that line just a little bit more clearly for folks that may not understand why understanding somebody having trauma has a direct impact in, if you're an employer and dealing with the public and hiring people or current employers or things of that nature.
Yeah. A lot of times what we find, and I've got a background in social work, social services, and so I'm kind of leaning on some of my experience in my work there in community mental health, residential work, otherwise, is that what we found is that many times our adults are really children at heart that have untreated trauma. And that trauma will manifest itself. It will show itself in a variety of ways. And again, as a youth, if left untreated, sometimes what can happen is it will continue to affect the individual and impact them in ways that, again, we see, on the job, for instance. So, tardiness, or not showing up for work, or not being able to maintain, employment. It also shows up in our relationships and how we interact and treat other people. And so if you've got someone who just isn't that likable individual, they've kind of got that chip on their shoulder, or they're always quick to kind of snap when somebody says something to them. Again, these are folks that could be responding to trauma that hasn't been dealt with. And again, there's a variety of ways, to do that. The trauma could lead to an actual mental health diagnosis, in which, medication might be appropriate, talk therapy could be appropriate. Other is just self-care, just how we take care of ourselves. And this is another, maybe a recommendation for employers is making sure that employees are knowledgeable about how to care for themselves, and then also have access to, and so I know some employers partner with local gyms and give discounted gym memberships, because exercise is a great way to deal with and manage stress.
Works
Those
for
EAP
me.
EAP programs, again, some of the holistic health, so yoga, meditation, those type of things are helpful. I think what we find too in our society now, though, sometimes we can be so work heavy and be so focused there. Some of our employers might run, multiple shifts, and it may be hard for employees to be able to walk away from the job to take care of themselves. But, just think, what if there was a 15-minute, kind of brain break, or kind of a reset break that employers could give, employees, so that they could go take 15 minutes and just center themselves, real quick, just how much that could possibly impact, productivity, how that could impact someone's enjoyment on the job and with an employer, and could hopefully lead to sustainability, in the workforce and with that employer.
So tell us a little bit more about how Wayne County Cares is structured. So you're the chief doing officer. Is there other staff? Are you it? Is it all volunteer based?
Yep. So mostly volunteer based. So we have myself and I guess am the staff. And then supporting me and supporting Wayne County Cares and leading the charge is our core team, who is made up of, I believe we've got about 12 individuals, again, from various sectors, a lot of education, juvenile justice, some mental health represented there as well. This year, we added in a high school student, a couple high school students, actually two high school students actually, to the core team to help inform, again, how we approach and think about working with youth and serving youth. And so we meet on right now about an as needed, just about bi-monthly basis, and have been working on creating the strategic agenda for our upcoming year as far as what Wayne County Cares is going to be focused on. And so we've got that set. And so in the upcoming year, Wayne County Cares is going to be working on, again, our annual event, and we're going to grow that. And so it's going to be very similar to what we've seen before, that call to action that we had recently piece, but then also opening it up to more of like a conference type style, in which we'll have breakout sessions to be able to, meet people where they are at, as they may be in different stages of their understanding of trauma. And then the second piece is going to be that awareness, that marketing piece of using our social media and maybe some other platforms to help make sure that the community is as knowledgeable about resources and organizations that can help as possible.
So how are you able to do the work that you're doing from a funding perspective? Excuse me. How is that working? Is it grant-based? Is it private funding? How are we doing this work with Wayne County Cares?
Yeah. So initially, which is, I think, important to point out, Wayne County Cares was really started on a volunteer basis. Just people who cared and were concerned came together and said, hey, let's meet and let's leverage our resources, our information, the knowledge that we have, and let's make this happen. Since then, and how I got into this position was that we were able to secure a grant from the Indiana Department of Health, which has helped to fund my work, and then also the work of Wayne County Cares. We've been gifted a space at Grassroots Action Resource Center, which the Wayne Township trustee owns and manages that space. And we've been able to use grant funds to equip that space with internet so that we can hold meetings there and do the work that we need to do there, as well as, be able to offer up that space for other uses, grassroots uses in the community as well. And the one thing, and that definitely is the thing that I really like about Wayne County Cares, and I like about being a coalition, is such that, and I've heard it described as it was a pickup game, is kind of how it got started, like a pickup game in basketball, which means too, despite, funding as it ebbs and flows, as long as you have people who care and who are committed to this work, Wayne County Cares can continue, and I believe will continue.
So knowing Wayne County Cares is a newer organization, what would you say the impact of Wayne County Cares has been to date on the community? What impact has it had?
I think definitely raising awareness. And so helping to communicate what trauma is, what resiliency is, how it impacts what resources we have here in the community. I think it's definitely helped bring people together. And so every time we have an event, we're seeing new faces, people who weren't at the event or at the table before. And so it's providing a space for these folks to network with each other and talk through, how they can come together and address some of these challenges. Our most recent event, we actually had about 12 different sectors that we focused on. So things like transportation, parent education, substance use, and others that we really challenged the participants at the event to look at and share with us who else is doing work in these sectors. So that way, again, we can bring these partners together and form even much more collaboration. And also, most recently, we had a youth summit. We added that to our annual event. And so we got about a little over 30 students from Richmond High School and Hagerstown High School that came and met with us and talked about 4 different areas that mattered to them and were able to give us their take on what their experience is like, but then also gave us some recommendations on how to improve the situation for them.
Right. Well, we're getting down to our I think last minute or two here with our time today. I mean, this is such a fascinating topic, and you're doing such amazing work. What brings you the most joy about what you do with Wayne County Cares?
The most joy, honestly, is to me, it's about the collaboration. It's about, breaking down silos. And we've talked about that in our community for years. And seeing people work across the sectors, whether that's private working with public, mental health working with private, agencies that you would think would be at odds or in competition with each other are coming together and having conversations as to how we can help and how we can combat this issue. That has been very rewarding, as well as being able to get our youth involved and getting them into conversations and empowering them to be able to take some ownership in making the community better.
Right. Wow. Well, that's a lot to take on, and we are so fortunate, Carl, to have you be the Chief Doing Officer for Wayne County Cares and trying to lead our community into that trauma-informed and resilient community. And so that'll take us to our time for today's episode. I want to thank Carl Rhinehart for sharing with the community and with me all about Wayne County Cares. So thank you very much, Carl. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for today's episode. Stay well, and we'll see you next time on The Third Sector.